This comic book describes a sexual aberration so shocking that I couldn't mention even the scientific terms on television. I think there ought to be a law against them. Tonight I'm going to show you why.
Opening my comic book vault of horror, guys. This is my first review of horror comics. This issue here you see in front of you is Eerie #1 from May 1951. This is deemed as a Golden Age 10-cent issue and was published by Avon Publications. I love that song, guys. By the way, in case you don't know, that song is from Bram Stoker's Dracula, part of one of the scenes in there in the movie. I just love that background music. Anyways, guys, getting back to this comic book, guys, being the fact that this is my first horror comic book review, I want to give you as much information about this comic book just for you future horror fans, or at least you new horror fans out there that are into comic books as well as I am. This comic book, guys, let me get the glare out of here. This comic book, like I mentioned, came out in May 1951, and it's actually the second series in the Eerie storyline of comics. The first series only had one issue, one comic in the first series, and it came out in 1947. For some unknown reason, it just stopped. After the first issue, nothing else was ever published. Until a few years later in 1951, which is this one right here. It redid everything all over again and basically renumbered it to back to issue #1. The 1947 comic book, which I'll show here, is a very, very hard to find comic. I believe there's actually only one on eBay right now, and it's kind of in a restored CGC grade. However, being the fact that it's so old and so rare to find, that specific comic book has been deemed the very first horror comic by Overstreet Price Guide and even our beloved Captain Strangelove. And I believe, matter of fact, he has one. Unfortunately, guys, I don't have that in my collection. I do have this one, and it is still a very hard to find comic book. Since it's the original, not a reproduction, it's the original 1951. This second series of Eerie had a lot of reproductions, especially this issue. This issue is somewhat a hard to find grab, and I was fortunate enough to pick it up on eBay. One specific publication that reproduced this comic book was IW Enterprises. So when you're out looking for Eerie comic book, guys, pay attention to the actual logo usually found on the cover. This specific logo here is detailing Avon Publications. The other logo that you may want to look out for, guys, would be IW Enterprises. Those usually mark as a reproduction and came out in the early to mid 1960s. Those are still some sought after horror comic books, even though they're reproduced, but these aren't the original 1950s Eerie. Starting out again, guys, in 1951, it reintroduced comic book horror back into society. The second series of Eerie had a short run of only 17 issues. Ceasing publication in 1954, Eerie then morphed into Strange Worlds number 18. That specific story I'll save for a later time. This first issue, guys, offered a reprint mini-story from the original 1947 Eerie comic book, labeled The Strange Case of Henpecked. And it was retitled in this comic book as Subway Horror. This Eerie number 1 had a total of 4 stories. The Werewolf of Warsham Manor, King of the Living Dead, The Subway Horror, The Monster from the Pit. Unfortunately, guys, at this time I do not have any names of the artists or even writers of these stories, specifically the cover. I could not find out any information on it. All of you seasoned collectors out there, if you have any idea or can at least give me any information on who the actual artist and writers for this comic book, I would really appreciate it. Just, comment below or send me a private message, because unfortunately I couldn't find it. But again, since I don't have the names, guys, the artwork itself is just awesome. Something that you would find and see in a 1950s supermarket or at least store on a newsstand. It's just awesome. Very, very cool. And you can tell specifically that it is in the 1950s era due to the hairdo and of course the clothing style that was actually portrayed within the artwork. Now what I'm going to do here, guys, I'm going to do a special treat for you. This comic book, when I purchased it, it came pretty heavily in Mylar, taped in double Mylar. It was protected with, I believe, 3 or 4 cardboard backings. Being the fact that it's really old, it's very, very fragile. So what I'm going to do for you guys, I'm going to go wash my hands. I'm going to come back and I'm going to open up this comic book and show you the artwork and some of the storyline inside. I'm only going to open this once. After I open it up and show you, I'm putting it away, and I'm actually considering of sending this off to CGC so I can get this graded. It probably will receive, if I'm correct, and hoping I am correct, it'll probably receive maybe a 2.5 to maybe 3.0 because it's in very good condition. So give me a few seconds, guys, and I'll be back. Now, in conclusion, guys, I want to go ahead and make sure everybody understands what I've been showing here in this video. Now, I'm pretty sure all of you seasoned comic book collectors already know the full history with horror, and especially this Eerie comic book. But there are a lot of new comic book collectors out there that may be interested. Ooh, hey, I want to start picking up horror. Or, hey, I've heard about this. I don't really know yet all about it. I want to make sure all of you guys know, what I found out, what I've read. The history with this horror comic book, guys, I understand that I've mentioned in the beginning of the video that this is the early 1950s, okay? In the early 1950s, even the late 40s, there was nothing like this. Everybody, children, parents, everybody in the world, they were used to seeing, superhero type comic books regarding, Superman, Shazam, Green Lantern, Batman. They were used to seeing these crime fighting type heroes. Along came the early 50s. It started to introduce kind of a new genre, horror, scary stories, demons, ghosts, goblins, and these comic books that were introduced prior, for children, reading, oh, look, Superman, he's going to save me, he's going to save the day. There's Batman fighting crime. Yeah, heroes, true heroes. Then all of a sudden, bam, scary stories, something to put children, to make them afraid to go to sleep, something to be scared about that's crawling underneath their bed. These comic books started to come out. Eerie, this number one, was somewhat one of the first storylines to come out in the 50s to start introducing horror to the general public, especially children. There have been a lot of stories out, or at least a lot of information on the internet regarding these type of comic books that when they were for sale in stores, in just small little store shops, candy shops, soda shops, kids would go in, and unfortunately they didn't have 10 cents. If they didn't have enough money, they would just go in and it would be there on newsstands. They'd pick it up, read it, oh wow, look at that. Or even there have been some instances where these so-called stores would rent the comic book out to children, meaning they would be there, on the newsstand, and the guy would say, hey, I'll let you read it and take it, for 15 minutes for a penny. So the child would pay a penny and they would go through and read the story. And the stories on here would have sometimes adult content, meaning rape, murder, just terrible acts of crime. And at that time, it was available to everybody. Okay, imagine, if some of you have kids out right now, having, say, maybe your 8-year-old or 5-year-old go into, maybe a local supermarket and pick up Saga. Oh yeah, look at Saga, look at this. Oh, and I know all of you that have Saga that have read it, you know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of adult content type material. It's the same thing back in the 50s, where parents and adults had no idea. They're like, oh, comic books, okay. Yeah, maybe it's about Superman, maybe it's about Batman. Nope, it's something entirely different. So they started going to the congressman, they started going to the government. Hey, I understand it's freedom of speech, but look what's coming out. Look, it's this horror, it's this type of storyline given to our children. That's what got America so riled up, especially the parents, because they did not want this type of content going out to children. Now, I think I would feel the same way, because I don't think I would let my daughter read adult type content, or at least mature content, like this or even Saga. No way. So I can see that point of view during that time frame. However, being the fact that it was freedom of speech, a lot of the comic book writers, developers, artists started coming together and, speaking up. Hey, it's freedom of speech. We should be able to do whatever we want. So the government came up with the Comic Book Code of Authority. Unfortunately, now with the modern day comics, they're no longer in, or at least they're no longer in business, the Comic Code of Authority. If you look in the early, 80s, 90s, or even starting back in the early 60s, you'll see this little stamp on the comic book that says Comic Book Code of Authority. That means it's approved. They looked at it, the story's good, it contains no type of mature related content, and then it was published and sent out in stands. Okay, so that's pretty much the basic information that I can give all of you new comic book goers. That this right here, this Eerie comic book, is what started it all. It started being introduced into the mass media. This is what started getting everything riled up. Okay. So one other thing, guys, before I let you go, I want to make sure that this Eerie comic book isn't confused or isn't misunderstood to be the Eerie magazine. The Eerie magazine is actually a separate, just a different type of publication. The Eerie magazine, it started coming out like in the mid or early 1960s, and it also told a lot of sci-fi, adventure, horror type related stories. I really enjoy the Eerie magazine. I have a whole set of them. I don't have the whole complete set, but I have a lot of them. And the cover and the artwork is just great. I'm not going to go into a review on this, guys. I will do one on a later video with some of my other Eerie magazines. But just so you guys know, like I mentioned, they're two separate comic book genre, or at least comic book storytelling. They're nothing the same. They're two different publications, and I don't really know how Warren Magazine obtained the Eerie title. I have no idea how they bought it. Maybe it was just never renewed. I don't know. It just all of a sudden, out of the early 60s, boom, this came out. So if anyone knows, feel free to chime in. But that's pretty much it, guys. Thanks for watching. I will be doing more horror comic book related reviews just like this once a month. So expect another one out in September. I have some really, really cool stuff like this that if you're interested. So again, guys, leave a comment. Let me know what you think. I know this video ran a little long. I apologize. It's my first kind of horror telling, and it always gives me goosebumps. It's like, hey, I know all this information. Blah, I want to just like throw it up in your face. You know, here's all this what I have. So that's pretty much it, guys. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, hit me up. Let me know, and peace.